You again. I suppose you want another story. This one's called Everything is Fine. I wake up. I eat breakfast while watching the news. It's always the same story. A serial hit and runner. 3 more dead. Everything is fine. I drive to work, lighting a cigarette before my shift starts. My wife always tells me my habits will start hurting me eventually. But what does she know? I am fine. Everything is fine. My boss calls me into his office. He tells me he has to let me go. He's sorry, but they can't have someone like me working there. Everything will be fine. I start driving home. I see a woman leaving the park with a small boy. No one else is around. Perfect. I leave them to bleed out on the road. I drive home. I am happy. I see a note on the table, my wife's handwriting. Took our son to the park. We'll be back around 8. I look at the clock. 7:57. 8 o'clock. 8:45. 10 o'clock. Is everything fine? I go to bed. I wake up. I eat breakfast while watching the news. It's always the same story. Nothing is fine. Well, that story certainly took a twist. Admittedly, I feel as if I could see it coming, but it was fun nonetheless. Definitely a disturbed individual. What did you think of that one? What's that? You want another? Ungrateful. Fine, how about a longer one? This story is called Be Careful Seeking Shelter in a Blizzard. You never know what might be behind the door. A quick respite from the brutal cold was all I wanted, so the sight of a small building was enough to fill me with hope. A concrete gray slab in the distance broke through the monotony of uninterrupted, sprawling fields of white. It feels like I've been wandering for hours, but I know I wouldn't have lasted that long. I quicken my pace, squinting desperately for any sign of life. I mentally rehearse the speech I'll give to them, half afraid my mind will be frozen over by the time I get there. The building nears just as I feel my legs start to give. I muster the last of my strength to trudge through the thick snow separating us. Light pools out from the structure ahead. I attempt to look for any identifying sign for the building, but my view is too obstructed from all the snow. My knees buckle as I lurch into the door, leaning against it for support. I hammer my fist onto the thick metal. Please, is anyone in there? The icy wind gets caught in my throat, my shout coming out strained. Please, help me. My car broke down and my phone's not working. I've no idea where I am. My hand impatiently reaches to try the handle. To my luck, It turns. Warmth instantly hits me as I swing open the door. Immediate relief tingling all over my body. I peel my hands out of my soaking mittens and bring them up to my mouth, blowing all of the air that is left in my lungs to warm them up. A quick glance around the place reveals that it's a lobby of sorts. Brochures are lined neatly in little stands off to the side of a large wooden desk. A faint pine scent wafts through the air. There's a lit fireplace in the corner. I take a few steps towards it and my attention is turned to a bin in the corner labeled Lost and Found. God, I hope someone forgot their blanket. I begin walking over to it while scanning the rest of the area. There's no sign of anyone despite the lit fireplace. I dive my hands into the basket, pulling out a bundle of entangled, fur-lined jackets. I hastily separate them and hear something clatter to the ground. A flip phone lies at my feet. Grabbing it, I stare at the object for a moment, dumbfounded. Why would this be here? I flip it open. A single bar of signal dips in and out at the top of the screen. Oh, please, please work. The flimsy keyboard clacks as I pound 3 digits into it. My breath hitches in my throat as it begins ringing. A second passes. Dial tone. Fuck. I slam it into the counter in annoyance. Sweeping up the bundle of thick jackets, I make my way over to the fire. I peel off my soaking coat, tossing it and my own phone in front of the flames to dry. Hopefully the owners won't mind that I'm here. Maybe I should go introduce myself. The heat melts away my worries for a moment. Leaning forward, I close my eyes and let the warmth soothe my chilled bones. I feel myself begin to drift off, the comforting air lulling me to sleep. Thump. My eyes shoot open, darting to find the source of the sound. The door sits ajar past the reception desk. Thump. Hello? I stare at the visible crack in the door for any sign of life inside. Is anyone there? My voice blares over the soft crackling of the fireplace. Thump. I glance forward. I glance toward the front door as I make my way over. A blanket of white encompasses the plane, blocking all light from entering into the small room. The other windows are similarly blocked, piles of thick snow sealing the building in. I guess I'll have to make myself comfortable here. An uneasy feeling washes over me. I slowly push myself off the floor, patting my pocket to feel for my knife. I inch closer, feeling more and more unsure with each step. The building feels like it's going to collapse inward on top of me, suddenly feeling much smaller than before. Has it always been so cramped? Rough hail threatens to break the windows, pelting the building with sheets of snow. A faint sound emits from the dark, so light that I have to strain myself to hear it. A constant stream of liquid drops to the floor like a leaky faucet. I stare into the inky blackness seeping through the crack, straining my eyes in an attempt to see anything. My hand pauses around the doorknob, my focus stolen as a faint sound coming from the depths of the room in front of me. It sounds as though something slick and heavy is being dragged across the floor, a sickening, wet sound smearing across the tile. My legs move involuntarily, stammering backwards. Part of me wants to call out, plead for help, yet something instinctual tells me to hold my breath, stay quiet. The sound grows increasingly fainter as it sinks further into the room. A sudden high-pitched creaking pierces through the silence, followed by a soft click. I take it as a sign to allow myself to breathe. Seeing my hand flush against the door, I hesitate for a moment and reconsider what I'm about to do. Light trickles into the room as I begin to push it open, revealing a scene to me in small glimpses. This area seems to be an extension of the lobby, much larger than the room I had entered from. Small tables that held local craft goods are now toppled on the ground. Shards of glass shimmer in the darkness, a glittery highlight atop dark red smears across the floorboards. The footprints make it look like something was pacing. My body screams at me to leave, to hide, to try to claw my way out through the wall of snow blocking me in. The dripping continues, a little louder than before. My attention is directed far off to my right, landing on an ajar door spewing out a tauntingly golden beam of light. A pool of red sits between the entryway. A large sign labeled bathroom sits above it. Seeing no other option, I begin to creep over as quietly as possible. My steps are slow and steady as I make my best attempt to cling to the wall. Glass crunches softly under my feet, unavoidable. I cling to the doorframe and brace myself to peer around, immediately recoiling once I do. Smears of dark red decorate the floor, preserved shoe prints dancing in circles around the small space. The off-white walls are painted a sticky maroon, drops and specks decorating the untouched surface. Despite the amount of blood, absolutely no sign of a body or anything that would indicate what happened here remains. My feet move faster than my mind can react, turning in a desperate attempt to flee and run anywhere but here. But I then begin to feel myself gliding on the slick floor, and my legs tangle. My shoulder smashes into a sink basin on my descent, red-hot pain searing through the bone. In an instant, I'm on the floor, scrambling to my soaked knees and watching as my covered hands paint the ground I crawl upon. I drag myself towards the door, shooting pain ricocheting throughout my body with each movement. I stare out the gap and strain my eyes to see if whatever had been out there has come for me yet. Summoning the last of my strength, I launch myself from the ground, my shoes sliding wetly across the floor. My adrenaline-fueled heart jolts in my chest as I hear the door slam open to my right, bare feet smacking rapidly across the tile, like it was waiting there for this moment to strike. The pounding reaches just behind me as my hands flail desperately for the exit, rapid, animalistic breaths growing louder and louder until the frantic grasps brush against my neck. My hand grasps the handle as I practically throw myself into the room, swinging the door shut and slamming into it with my entire body weight. The world crashes to a sudden standstill. I remain flush against the door, filling my strained lungs with as many ragged breaths as I can manage to choke down. No resistance meets me on the other side. I try to gather the willpower to move, to crawl further away, to be anywhere but pressed against this door. yet I remain rooted in place. I practice in my mind over and over the series of actions to grab the cabinet to my right, shoving it in my place and building a barricade of sorts. Yet a million what-ifs occur through my mind. What if it's still there? What if it's just waiting for me to move again? I can't just keep waiting here. One more moment passes before I project myself off the door, grabbing the dresser with practiced movements and flinging it where I had been. My body moves faster than my mind can process my actions as I stack more and more objects against the door. I lurch gracelessly in pain and strain against the weight of the tall bookshelf as I drag it closer and closer, paper cascading like an avalanche to the floor. My back begins to give as I finally rest it in front of my makeshift barricade. I recoil the moment I let go, walking backwards, trying to put any distance between myself and that door, while my chest heaves. The phone rang out suddenly with a piercing cry, filling the room with a high-pitched ringing. I whip around and stare at the object sitting on the floor. A rush of relief flushes over me as the ringtone continues to play. I take one more cautionary look at the door before sprinting over and scooping up the object. Fumbling with it in my hand, I clumsily flip it open and jam the green button. "Hello? Please, do you hear me?" I sob into the phone. Please help me, please. I don't know where. Hello? Please, do you hear me? My own voice plays back through the receiver. The phone nearly slips through my finger, my heart plunging into my stomach. The rest of my plea begins repeating back to me, interspersed with rapid, shallow breaths. Without thinking, I throw the phone across the room and run opposite of the door, shrinking against the wall and finding myself on the floor. My breathing runs rampant, uncontrollable, my lungs struggling to keep up as I hyperventilate. The soft sounds coming from the phone seem to mimic my own. My head whips around the room, searching for any possible escape or solution, yet I find nothing. It's either go face that thing, or struggle with the mountains of snow blocking the entrance, which would not be possible with my shoulder in such bad shape. I crawl over to the safety of the fireplace, curling into a ball and resigning myself to accept what may be my end. I bundle one of the jackets into a pillow and try my best to ignore the deep, ragged breaths coming from the other side of the room. Bang, bang, bang! My eyes shoot open and I instinctively shoot upright, backing myself further into the corner. Bang, bang! Hello? Anyone in there? A gruff voice calls from the front door. I propel myself off the ground as I run as fast as I can. I saw that the lights were on, and I cut him off, swinging the front door open and collapsing into his arms. My body convulses uncontrollably, heavy sobs flowing out of my throat. He hesitates before lightly putting his arms around me, leading me out and shutting the door. I close my eyes and shrink against him, reduced to being inconsolable. He lets go for a moment and begins reaching towards the door. An inhuman wail leaves my body, and I pull him backwards with what little strength remains inside of me. He acts like he's going to protest, but then he turns and looks at me, and the thought seems to die in his throat. Everything that happened next was a complete blur. We step out and he leads me to his cabin. I explain everything to him through labored breaths as we walk, him listening and nodding sympathetically. tells me that he's a neighbor, and he had noticed that he hadn't seen the woman that owns the shop leave before the storm hit. He'd also noticed the lights on, and her car still in the driveway. My sobs became more ragged as I collapsed a bit inward, leaning on him for support. I tell him of the blood that I saw in the bathroom, and the state of disarray the shop had been in. He stills for a moment. He asks if I saw her or anyone else in the building, but my throat has closed completely, incapable of getting out any sound. He nods solemnly. At his cabin, he allows me to use his landline and get in contact with a tow truck while he calls the police on his cell phone. The man seems welcoming, allowing me to stay and recover in his guest room. The rest of the night went by in a blur between giving my statement and trying to locate where I had abandoned my truck. It's been about a month since the incident now. I still really don't have any answers for anything that happened during that blizzard. To my knowledge, they never found the woman that lived there, and when police had searched the building, it had been completely empty. Just the devastated, blood-spattered remains of the store lingered. I'm still working on processing everything. None of it feels real to me yet. I found myself doubting my memory of it frequently and just repeating the events that happened in my head over and over again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, but the occasional ache in my shoulder casts those doubts away. I've been doing my best to avoid the area, but have been slowly building more confidence driving there when I have to. Yet I still don't know if I will ever feel comfortable leaving the house when it's snowing ever again. Well then, an interesting tale. I wonder what happened to that woman. What happened to the store? Perhaps she was behind it. Maybe we have an unreliable narrator. Who knows? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Very interesting tale. What's that? You'd like to hear another one? All right. Greedy. The story's called I Really Used to Love Jogging at Night. I had never been someone you would imagine as the picture of physical health. Throughout my career working as an actuary, I spent most of my weeks sitting on a chair, poring over an endless stream of spreadsheets, and sipping coffee with an unholy amount of cream. On the weekends, I would binge whatever hit shows were released on the plethora of streaming platforms I begrudgingly subscribed to. All in all, I never considered what effect my largely sedentary lifestyle would have on my health. But that all changed last winter. I was helping my mother move furniture for a garage sale when I felt an intense pain in my back. I didn't think much of it at first, but as the pain worsened, I realized that the unimaginable was happening. After a short ambulance ride and a long hospital stay, I was given the good news. I was a very lucky man. I'd survived a heart attack. But considering I had a body mass index of 41 by my 42nd birthday, I knew I had to make a change. Ever since that horrible day, I have been focused on my health, almost to a flaw. I diet, I go to the gym every other day, and I use a standing desk at my office. I've honestly never felt so confident. Especially now that I've lost 50 pounds since last year. As a part of this change, I've made it a ritual for a 2-mile run every Friday night to help clear my mind after the week at work. Just running through the park near my urban apartment always gives me a sense of clarity, a perspective that helps me center myself. This Friday started like any other. I grabbed my running shoes and earbuds and set my smartwatch to time my run before jogging out the door. Usually I listen to ambient music, soft instrumentals to contribute to my meditation during the run. But as I started down my route, silence greeted me. Not willing to stop my exercise to see what the issue was, I popped out the earbuds, deciding the silence of the night would be just as acceptable. It was a clear, beautiful night, the moon peeking shyly through a layer of dark clouds, providing a pale glow to accompany the harsh light provided by the electric lamps lining the running path. It was only 8 p.m. when I started my run, but the stars had already begun to twinkle overhead, barely visible with the ambient glow of the city underneath. The repetitive crunch of my shoes on the concrete began to lull me into a trance as I ran at a comfortable pace down the aisle of bare, deciduous trees. With a sudden awareness, I realized that my path was blocked by the form of a man. He was tall, taller than me by at least a foot, and seemed to be wearing some sort of dark trench coat or cloak that obscured his body. I slowed to a walk as I drew nearer, the moon reflecting dully off his black, matted hair. He stared at me, with pupils so wide it was as if his eyes were chips of obsidian buried inside of his skull. By this point, there was 5 feet between us. The man stared at me, turning his head from one side to the other. I could feel my pulse quickening, but not because of the cardio workout, but rather from the sudden fear that gripped me. I didn't know what to say, so I lamely called out, "Hey there." The man didn't respond, but began to shake his head vigorously, convulsing rapidly. As I stood there, completely unsure of what to do and frozen by a sudden burst of fear, I noticed some odd features of the stranger blocking my path. His hands moved almost non-stop, passing back and forth under the blanket he wore like a cape, scratching frantically at his legs. He was muttering under his breath, something I couldn't quite understand despite straining to hear. I realized that the man was likely having a mental health crisis of some sort, or maybe suffering from some sort of drug overdose, I don't know. Despite that, I couldn't help but feel terrified by the stiff, unnatural way he moved, as if he was being twisted and contorted by an invisible puppeteer. I reached into my pocket to retrieve my cell phone, trying to dial 911 and hopefully get an ambulance here. But the moment I took my eyes off of this stranger, I heard an immediate shuffle of movement. And when I looked up, the man was simply gone, without a trace. I shuddered, suddenly aware of how impenetrable the darkness off to the sides of the trail was. I decided to cut my run short, turning around to run back the way I came, through the park trail. As I ran, I strained to listen for any sounds that would indicate I was being followed, but was greeted only by the dull thud of my own feet on the pavement. With my head on a swivel, I worked my way back to my apartment building, punching the code into the gate at the stairwell before heading up to my floor. After getting inside, I allowed myself time to process this experience, silently thanking whoever was watching out for me. Just when I thought the nightmare was over, I saw my doorknob begin to jiggle from the corner of my eye. Fortunately, the deadbolt stopped the would-be intruder, but as my veins filled with ice, I ran to look through the peephole. What greeted me was a pitch-black void, as though the world had been drained of all light. I thought that someone had covered the tiny window, when with a sudden motion, the darkness I gazed into blinked. I realized then, with a shock of fear, that I was looking straight into the eye of the man I had seen in the park. The wide, dilated pupils taking up the entirety of the door's minuscule peephole. I found myself transfixed as I gazed with horror into his eye. With a sharp motion, the man pulled away from the door, and I could see him standing there on my welcome mat, his hands roving across his face and frantically scratched and pulled on his skin. I could see the blood start to drip down his nose and cheeks as he began to tear at his pale flesh. He didn't seem to feel any pain, just staring straight ahead as his fingernails cut deeply into his forehead. I fumbled for my phone, trying desperately to call for help. With a thunderclap, I jumped back from the door when I felt a sudden weight slam against it. I gave up trying to watch him through the hole, and just sat there on the phone with the dispatcher, wedging myself against the door. Help was on the way, but I wondered if he would be able to kick the door in before help arrived. After a few minutes of silence passed, I slowly stood and cautiously looked through the peephole again, holding my breath. Once again I was greeted with darkness, so I quickly ducked back down. I told the 911 operator that the man was still at my door, and she reassured me that the police were almost there. I sat, barely daring to breathe as I listened to the officers arrive. When I heard them knock on my door, I shakily stood and threw the door open in a rush. The rest of my night was spent answering the cops' questions and filling out a witness statement as they assured me that they would investigate it thoroughly. After all, the sergeant chuckled, we have plenty of DNA evidence. What do you mean? I whispered, bile rising in my throat as I began to imagine what lay in the hallway beyond my door. With a knowing look to his partner, the officer stood and gestured for me to step out into the landing in front of my apartment. When I did, he slowly shut the door to show me the outward-facing side of it. When I saw the state of the whitewashed wood door, I gasped in abject horror. The last time I had looked out the peephole and saw only blackness wasn't because the man was looking in at all. Rather, it was because of the blood, skin, and dark black hair that was messily smeared over the entirety of my front door. Disturbing. Well, I wonder if that man was just a man with peculiarly large pupils, or something else. Either way, it was definitely a disturbing experience. Let me know what you think he might have been in the comments beneath. And as much as you may beg for more, I'm done telling stories today. I do hope that you'll join me in the future for more Frail Blaze tales. Oh, and subscribe already.